Everything in the universe is matter and energy. So that means if we have life, what is going to sustain that life as a system is a certain input of energy and a certain input of matter. When energy and matter go into life, energy and matter will wind up coming out of life as well. Sometimes the matter itself has energy associated with it, and sometimes it doesn't. Well, usually the matter has some energy associated with it. So we'll say there's energy and matter coming out. Usually, this energy winds up being something that that particular life form can't use itself as energy. And the matter, sometimes this is something that becomes that life form, and sometimes it becomes some sort of excrement that the life form gives off. Historically, like way before humans, way before even animals, some living things came up with this method of grabbing the stuff they needed to make their own bodies. So if you have some form of life, one of the things that life wants to do is it wants to build itself, it wants to create more of itself, and it's going to need a certain amount of building material. And the building material that life needs the most of is going to be carbon. Now, the living things were looking around and they were like, oh my God, there is so much CO2 out there. And this CO2 looks like this. It's got an oxygen and a carbon in between and another oxygen. These are double bonds. So this is a really, really strong bond. Plant life was like, if we could just break that bond, we can grab that carbon and we can totally go to town and build ourselves out of that carbon. We could probably even use the oxygen for something as well. Well, it just so happens that there's also an awful lot of H2O floating around. And H2O is, of course, water. So life was like, hey, I want to have that carbon. I think I want to have some of that hydrogen. I'm going to use some of that oxygen. And of course, other stuff was used as well, nitrogen and phosphorus and so forth, sulfur. But what's important is that the carbon and the hydrogen was happening in the plant life, or what eventually became plant life. But the life at the time said, I want to use that carbon. I want to use that water, which looks a bit like this. But these bonds and these bonds are really, really strong. So we're going to need energy to break these bonds and change up how these atoms are arranged so the living thing can turn it into itself or into its children. Now, there was a ready source of energy there that's still there today. That ready source of energy is sunlight. This process of taking sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and combining it together became the energy and the matter inputs into a process that we call photosynthesis. Photo means light, synthesis means putting stuff together. So photosynthesis is the process that some living things put things together using light. What they get out of that is some energy, but this energy is going to be locked into some matter, and this matter is going to be what's known as a carbohydrate. So it's going to have some carbon, it's going to have some hydrogen, it might even have some oxygen and some other stuff, and this is going to be arranged in a way that becomes the plant itself. There was another bit that came out as well. There wound up being excess oxygen. Molecular oxygen, O2. This molecular oxygen became a waste product from this photosynthesis reaction. And this waste product, when recombined with some combination of carbon, hydrogen, and even if there's some oxygen in there, winds up releasing energy. So it took sunlight to separate out that energy, giving us oxygen and some plant material at the end of it. And that's what we mean by there is energy associated with the output. For our purposes here, we're going to simplify this down and just call all of this plants. It's not really quite that simple, but that's beyond the scope of what we're going to worry about in these videos, because we're really focusing on this energy piece. So, these things that photosynthesize, we'll call them plants. I know they're not all plants, but we'll call them plants. Plants now have some carbon, some hydrogen, some oxygen, and other stuff in there as well, in some general form. And then some other living creatures were like, hey, there's matter right there, and we can use this matter as a way of building our own bodies if we can, go and grab this plant and make it part of ourselves. And we call that eating. So the process of eating plants is the process of both matter and energy going into an animal. But there's something else animals need as well. Animals need oxygen. So animals don't just eat, animals breathe as well. And that molecular oxygen also goes into the animal. And the process of combining this oxygen with this matter right here is the process of releasing this energy. So what animals will release is CO2. They'll also release some water. And then from this eating process, they will get out energy. This means that animals are running photosynthesis in reverse. All living things require matter and energy to survive and to procreate. Different living things have come up with different strategies for getting that matter and energy. It all starts with the sun. The sun winds up providing the input energy for creatures that can do photosynthesis. We're going to call those creatures plants. I know it's more complicated than that, but just for simplicity, we're just going to call those plants. So the sun becomes our source of energy, and the source of matter for the plants, and for life in general, is going to wind up being the earth, the ground, the water, and the air. But we're going to focus just on carbon dioxide and water. So these become the matter inputs for plants. Plants wind up giving off plant matter and oxygen. Plant matter and oxygen independently of each other can't really do much, but when you bring them back together, they can release energy. So there's a potential energy, a chemical potential energy associated with that. So plants give off chemical potential energy because plant matter and oxygen together have the potential to release a certain amount of energy. Other living things eat the plants as a way of getting both matter and energy. These other living things also breathe in the oxygen, so plant matter and oxygen become the matter input that animals are going to use to build their own bodies. And this chemical potential energy comes when the animals breathe in oxygen and then can have chemical reactions between oxygen and plant matter, functionally running photosynthesis backwards. Other animals will take the fact that this animal will now have animal matter, often referred to as meat, and there will be chemical potential energy associated with that as well. The animals will also give off CO2 and H2O, which become an input over here for the plants. So this comes back over here and starts the cycle over again. But this chemical potential energy and this animal matter wind up going into other animals, and so forth and so on. There's, of course, a big entire cycle that goes with this. But what we're talking about right now is energy is traveling from the sun into the plants. The plants make a chemical potential energy and matter, which then are eaten by animals, and then other animals can eat those. And at every step, we wind up losing roughly 90% of the energy from one stage to another. We also wind up losing roughly 90% of the matter. So animals, for example, wind up defecating. They give off poop. Pieces that they can't wind up digesting, various matter that they couldn't incorporate into their bodies. Of course, we also give off heat. So all animals wind up radiating out some heat, and the process of radiating out some heat winds up meaning there's waste energy. So we have waste energy and waste matter at every step of the way. This is really, really important because every energetic process is going to have energy in, matter in, and it's also going to have energy out and matter out, some of which will not be useful. We will always wind up with some waste.